My name is Tim Clowers, and I'm going to show you how to make a smoked pork butt from beginning to end. The first thing you're going to need is a bone-in pork butt. This particular bone-in pork butt is 8.23 pounds. So the first thing that we've got to do is we got to take it out of its pack and we're going to dry it off. I've got the pork out of the package and I'm just going to set it on some paper towels in order to dry it off. Pat it dry, Just get rid of any moisture that's on the pork butt itself. Just dry it off. There we go. Now the next step is we're going to season the pork butt. But before we do that, let's talk about mess for a second. Let's face it, barbecuing is a very messy business. So I'm inside currently, but we're gonna go outside. I've got a large piece of foil and I've just laid it down on my sheet pan to catch all the drippings and all the extra seasonings that may come off of the pork butt. So what this does is strictly just helps minimize your cleanup. That's all. Now let's get to the rub. Okay, here's my bowl. Now here's the seasoning mix that's gonna go on the pork butt. Salt, pepper, paprika, chili powder, garlic powder, and onion powder. So first of all, I've got a 1/4 cup of salt, a 1/4 cup of black pepper, a 1/4 cup of paprika, 2 tablespoons of each. Regular chili powder, garlic powder, onion powder. Let's give those a mix. One thing I'm going to communicate is about your hands. I do have gloves on. You don't have to use gloves, but always remember when you're working with smoked meats or getting your meat seasoned to go on the smoker, try to keep one hand or the other clean. Let that be your seasoning hand. So let me grab the pork butt. There's the pork. Now the first thing that you want to do is recognize which is the top and which is the bottom. This is the top where there's some fat. This particular pork butt doesn't have a large fat cap, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and score it to ensure that I get past the fat cap and penetrate down into the meat. I don't know, you want Flavor Town, that's what I'm talking about. All right, just score it at a diagonal motion both ways so that you have it looking something like that. Now the next thing you wanna do is get some oil. Remember, my right hand is clean, and we're gonna drizzle some oil, just some extra virgin oil, avocado oil. The reason that I'm doing this is we want the rub to stick all over the pork butt. Now, let's take our seasoning mix. Our right hand is clean, and we're just gonna generously season the pork. Get it? I said generous. All right, the bottom, the sides, everywhere. You got a beautifully seasoned pork butt. Now, ideally, what I recommend is to put this in the refrigerator overnight so that some of the spices or seasonings you put on your pork can begin to marry with the pork and get real good and happy. Now, let's put this on the smoker after it's marinated overnight. One thing that I do highly recommend is you get you one of these MEATER Plus thermometers. What it allows you to do is to track the temperature of the meat throughout the cook. That way you can know when to cover it or wrap it. Now I've got my Camp Chef smoker set at 275 degrees. I've got my MEATER Plus probe in there in order to track the temperature of the meat throughout the cook. I let it sit on the counter for 30 minutes to come up to temperature a little bit before we actually load it onto the smoker. We're 90 minutes into the cook and I've got a mixture of pineapple juice and apple juice. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna spritz the pork butt. And I'm gonna do this about every hour until we reach an internal between 165 to 170 or until we see that nice bark before we wrap it. The pork butt is sitting at 168 degrees, so we're gonna go ahead and pull it off and set it in an aluminum pan. Set it down right in there. I'm gonna take that same bottle that I've been spritzing with pineapple juice and apple juice and just pour it right on top. Just be very generous with it. I don't know, about a quarter to a half a cup. Now next, let's get some butter and just make this pork even happier. That's more like 4 tablespoons of butter. And I'm gonna cover it. My meter probe is still in there. Cover it with foil. It's gonna go back on the smoker until the internal reaches about 203. All right, I just pulled that pork off the smoker, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set it inside my hot box. And if you don't have a hot box, you can just use a standard cooler. Let it sit in there for about hour and a half. You could even pull it an hour, but I like to do an hour and a half sitting in the hot box. Just gonna stick it right inside. Close it up, we'll come back in an hour and a half. So I pulled the pork out after 90 minutes of sitting in the hot box. First thing I do is pull that meter plus meat probe out of there, or temperature probe, then the bone. It just slips right out, no effort, and I'm gonna shred it with my hands. I do have garden gloves on under these nitrile gloves, and I'm just gonna shred it pretty fine. That's just kind of the way we like it so that we can put it on sandwiches, or bread, whatever. And then the reason I do that is because it will, once it sits for a few minutes, it will absorb all of that butter and juice and the juice from the pork. If you let it sit, it'll absorb all that back into the pork. Yep, that's my wife snagging a bite there. So you can see the smoke ring. It's delicious. Hit me up in the comments if you have any questions, and thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to Chef Tim Clowers.